The capital of any country is the prize catch. In any war, the capital of an enemy country has to fall for some form of military victory to be declared. And that is what happened in the Second World War. It ended officially when the Soviet Red Army walked into Berlin, attacking the city from 3 different directions. After 10 days of intense fighting, Marshal Georgy Zhukov's troops took charge of large parts of North as well as Eastern Berlin. Hitler committed suicide on the 30th of April, and the war in Europe officially ended 10 days later. Today, 75 years on, it's the same fight for the capital. Kyiv is the ultimate prize for Russia. It is the very heart of Ukraine. It is the city from where the Russian Empire began. It is the capital. It houses the Zelensky regime, a regime which Vladimir Putin so badly wants to oust. For over a month now, Russian troops have tried to enter the city both from the east and from the west, but they could not. On Crux DeCode this week, why Russian troops could not take Kyiv and whether this was Vladimir Putin's plan all along. The bigger the city, the more difficult it is to seize. And Kyiv is an enormous city. It is larger in land area than New York City. And Russian troops have been struggling to capture Kyiv. Russia vastly underestimated the Ukrainian resolve to defend its capital. And a Russian military is trained for open spaces. It's trained for open warfare. They are not trained for what is the basic realities of urban warfare. An army is taught to fight conventional wars using artillery and tanks and air power, not to engage in street-by-street guerrilla warfare. An army does not know how to defend a city block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. The Russian army failed to enter or even surround Kyiv. How did it go wrong? In fact, the campaign started off on the wrong note when Russian helicopters assaulted the Hostomel airfield right on the outskirts of Kyiv. They could not capture the airport. Because the military failed to hold the airport, it could not attack from the air. It could not deploy Russian air assets. The next day, Russia tried to send a small force directly into the heart of Kyiv. They had one aim, and that was to topple the Zelensky regime. But then, fighting for a major city like Kyiv can be bloody, it can be time-consuming, and it can take a lot of work. A column of Russian trucks moved straight down one of the main thoroughfares, a road, a highway in fact, that would lead right into the heart of Kyiv. But this column, surprisingly, was not supported either by infantry on the ground or by air power. So as a result of which, this advance was stalled. You look at all the suburbs, whether it's Bucha or Irpin or Brovary, the Russian tank columns were stopped in all of these neighborhoods leading up to the heart of Kyiv. Now, the Russian military leadership thought that Ukraine would collapse at the very first sign of fighting. They also thought that Zelensky would flee, much like Ashraf Ghani, the former Afghan president, fled a few months ago when the Taliban took over Kabul. That was a complete underestimation of Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian people. Even outnumbering Ukrainian fighters was not a good enough strategy, because how can you outnumber a city which has 3 million people? After the disastrous initial attempt on Kyiv, Russia then changed its strategy. It adopted a different tack. It tried to encircle Kyiv from all 4 directions. So first, they would have an outer ring which would block crucial weapons and supplies from getting into Kyiv, and then there would be an inner ring which would seal off the opposing forces and provide a solid base for a more direct and a more robust attack on Ukrainian troops. But the Russian offensive stalled without completing either the outer ring or the inner ring. It also gave time to the Ukrainians to block, to fortify, and to barricade the entire city, and which is exactly what they did to protect Kyiv. Ukrainian forces relentlessly attacked Russian positions along all major highways leading up to Kyiv. They used Stinger missiles, Javelin missiles, anti-tank weapons to try and stop these Russian convoys, all of which were like sitting ducks on long stretches of highways, because the only way in and out of Kyiv was through these highways, so there were these single columns of tanks which had to pass through without protection from either side of the road. Even if the Russian military had entered the eastern side of the city, there was another element that gave the Ukrainians defensive cover: the Dnipro River. It splits the city bang in the middle. What the Ukrainians did was to park themselves across bridges and blow up those bridges every time a Russian convoy approached, and thereby they were once again stalling the Russian advance. After crossing one of the bridges, Russian forces would still need to climb a steep slope to get up to the western side, which acts almost like a natural cover for the center of Kyiv. Now, among the biggest surprises in the battle for Kyiv was that the Russian military never fully controlled airspace over Kyiv. Now, that was a categorical mistake, because what it meant was that all of the air assets that Russia had, and of course Russia has a far superior air force than that of Ukraine, that could not be deployed. All the missile strikes had to be from hundreds of kilometers away, thereby using up Russian-made medium-range missiles very quickly. But there was also one other reason. Airstrikes would mean a large number of civilian casualties. You look at all the American airstrikes, whether it was in Iraq or in Afghanistan, or of course even in the Vietnam War, there were a huge number of civilian casualties, collateral damage, because from the air, from 30,000 feet up in the air, there is very little way you can distinguish between civilian and combatant population. One other noticeable feature was Russia was using airstrikes only to target Ukraine's military installations and its fuel depots. So the idea was to ensure that the Ukrainian military was cramped both for logistics and for counterattacks. And that is exactly what happened, because a large portion of the Ukrainian regular army got stuck in major cities while the deadly fighting shifted towards the east in the Donbass. And there, the Ukrainians could not deploy their regular troops, therefore they left the war there to mercenaries like the Azov Brigade. Ultimately, it boils down to one question. Did Vladimir Putin miscalculate in his aims, or was this his plan all along? To keep the civilian casualties to a minimum in order to render the Ukrainian military a toothless force. In the process, Russia too has been inflicted tremendous damage, and it'll take some years for it to recover. Also, Russia today finds itself more isolated globally than ever before in the last 30 years. Both sides have taken heavy losses, and the fight for Kyiv could still resume. Russia could still come back for a fresh offensive. Air attacks could destroy civilian infrastructure, it could kill thousands of people, or the Russian army could try to muster forces to attack the capital from the ground. But for now, Russia's prized catch, Kyiv, seems out of reach.